There are moments in life when faith asks us to do something that makes absolutely no sense. Sometimes something feels risky, something that, faith makes us do something that causes us to look around and say, are you sure, God? And sometimes faith asks us to do something even crazier. Today's story is one of those stories. It is a story about what happens when Jesus calls us beyond what is comfortable or familiar, beyond what we know we can do on our own. It is a story about a God who reaches out a hand when we begin to sink. The Sea of Galilee can be calm one minute and violent the next. The disciples are in a boat and it is nighttime. A storm blows down from the hills, but then through the downpour, they see a figure approaching the boat on top of the water. And their first reaction is, "Holy cow, it's a ghost." They use a word a lot that time, by the way. Little wonder they were terrified at what they saw. The sea, after all, in their culture, was the place of demons and diabolical monsters, like a screaming nightmare that wakes you up trembling and fearful. They never expected Jesus to come to them in this way. So when he did, they thought it was a ghost. I mean, walking on water? A human impossibility. And they are terrified. And honestly, who could blame them? If I'm sitting in a boat in the middle of a violent storm and somebody starts walking toward me across the water, I'm probably not thinking, wonderful, here comes Jesus. No, I'm probably thinking, we are all going to die here. But then Jesus speaks. He says, "Take heart, it is I, the great I am, God in the flesh. Do not be afraid. Keep your eyes focused on me." In baseball, the coach would tell the players to always keep their eyes on the ball when they come up to bat. It would mean the difference between making a hit, a strike, or in some cases, getting hit by the ball. Peter does a crazy thing. He says, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus says, "Come." So Peter gets out of the boat, starts walking on the water, and comes towards Jesus, and then he gets distracted. He shifts his focus away from Jesus, and he notices the strong wind. He becomes frightened, and he starts to sink. When I was a kid, a long time ago, this reminded me of this cartoon, how was it called? Wile E. Coyote? Remember? The coyote chasing the road runner off the cliff. Remember that? The road runner always makes it across the gap, but every time the coyote halfway across becomes aware that there is nothing beneath his feet, he stops cold and then he plummets down. It's just like Peter, I believe that it was not the storm that sank Peter. It was fear and his inability to believe in the sustaining presence of God in the midst of the storm. And the fear that Peter felt is probably not unfamiliar to us, that kind of sinking feeling. Fear of losing control or being controlled. Fear of death. Fear of life. We all face things that scare us. And some of you right now, I can tell you this, some of you right now may be suffering from homilophobia. Do you want to know what that is? The fear of sermons. Now, the truth is that there is not always a lot we can do against that which does not wish us well, except to keep from giving it more power than it deserves, except to ask for help when we need it, as Peter did. "Lord, save me," he cried. And as soon as he asked, Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" I don't think that Jesus is scolding him. His words were not intended to belittle Peter, but simply to teach him the reality of the sustaining presence of God in his darkest hour. The miracle of this story has less to do with a Jesus who comes by impossible means than with a Jesus who comes at impossible times. And folks, Peter had faith. But faith is not the absence of fear, but the courage to walk through the fear, to take the hand that is offered. To be courageous is not to be fearless. It is to be able to act in spite of fear. We cannot control whether or not we are going to be visited by fear, but we can decide whether or not we are going to invite fear in and let it live in our hearts and control what we do. And by the way, sometimes we think faithful people are people who never sink. They do. They do. Faithful people sink too. The difference is that they know who to call when they do. And I think that's where this story becomes very deeply personal. Because every one of us has a boat. The boat is the place where we feel safe and secure. It is what we know. It is something familiar. It is what we've always done. But there are moments when Jesus says, "Come." And we have to decide whether we're going to stay in the boat or step out on faith. And sometimes stepping out on faith means simply saying, "Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord," before we know exactly where that yes will take us. It is letting the Spirit determine our steps. The church also is a nave, is a ship, is a vessel, is a boat. This is also a story about the church. We are the boat, and we have a choice. We can stay tied to the dock or follow Jesus as he says, come. Because this is the thing. The church has always been called to step beyond what is comfortable. Remember that the early church stepped out. It crossed cultural boundaries. It challenged systems of injustice and oppression. It cared for people whom society ignored. It risked its safety to share the good news. And that is what the church is still called to do. Because the world needs a church that embodies the love of Jesus. A church willing to say, we are going there because Jesus is there. So let me ask you this question. Where is Jesus calling you to go? How are we going to help people experience God's love? And how do we reach people who are outside the boat? And let's make this real, because faith isn't just something we talk about. We need to make it real as we step out the church doors on faith. So maybe one way to step out on faith is to stop thinking of ministry as something that happens primarily inside these walls. I mean, don't we say the church is not a building, the church is the people? Then we need to go where people are hurting, where children are struggling, where seniors are lonely, where people are struggling to make ends meet. We need to meet people where they are. Stepping out on faith may mean letting go of the things that once worked but no longer serve the mission. Trying something new, creating new ministries, taking risks with our resources, changing how we worship, how we communicate, building partnership outside the church, going into places where we have never gone before, and believing God is calling us to something more. I know that some might prefer to stay in the boat, and maybe some things won't work, and sometimes we'll sink. But remember, Jesus does not abandon people who sink. He will not let us sink, not now, not ever. Remember, Peter the rock sank. But he became the servant God used to build his church. So maybe our failures, our hesitations, our doubts aren't the end of the story. Maybe God can take even those things and use them. So, church, it is time to step out on faith. Wherever Jesus is calling us, that's where we need to go. And God's grace is going to be there waiting for us, no doubt about it. We step out on faith not because we know exactly what will happen, but because Jesus is standing out there saying, come. And if Jesus says, come, let's take the risk. Let's change lives. And let's become the church God is calling us to be. And if we flounder, if we begin to sink, well, we already know what's going to happen next. Help is at hand. Jesus reaches out his hand, and we keep going. Amen.